Welcome to the deep dive. So here's something that's been rattling around in my head. If showing your struggles, your pain, online could actually bring you support, maybe even validation or opportunities,
Mm.
where does that line get drawn between being real and, well, something else?
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? We're in this moment where attention is, it's precious.
Right.
And stories about overcoming things, they just capture that attention so powerfully,
Right.
which it raises this pretty basic question about what kinds of stories actually make it to the top and, why.
It's almost like when you look at the whole digital landscape, there's this unspoken marketplace for experiences, right?
Mm.
Could it be that the stories of hardship that are, let's say, the most compelling, maybe not always 100% accurate, are the ones getting all the traction, getting the most sort of social currency?
And we see hints of this, maybe even in our own lives in small ways. Have you ever caught yourself framing a minor issue, a little setback, with just a touch more drama when you tell someone, just to get that stronger reaction, that bit of empathy?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Guilty as charged. I mean, I've probably turned a simple traffic jam into some kind of epic saga just for a better story later.
Right. It's human nature. We want connection. But online, everything gets amplified, doesn't it? Those impulses just get bigger.
Exactly. We talk a big game about admiring strength, resilience, toughing it out. But then you scroll through any social media feed, what actually stops your thumb?
That's the real paradox, isn't it? We're told, be resilient. But the loudest voices, the ones getting heard, are often the ones detailing their vulnerabilities. So is the suffering we're seeing always genuine? Or is it sometimes maybe a carefully crafted performance, designed to hit just right, maybe go viral?
Think about that whole arc we see with online figures now. There's some kind of scandal, then this tearful video pops up detailing all their personal struggles, and then
Right.
what happens?
Yeah, often a boost in relatability, right? New followers, maybe even new deals.
Exactly. So is that real remorse, real accountability, or is it just, smart crisis management? Using vulnerability as a way back into the spotlight.
Which puts us, the audience, in a really tricky spot, ethically speaking. When you see a story, a victim narrative, and it just feels a bit off, a bit performative, what do you do?
Do you voice that skepticism? You risk getting slammed online, called insensitive.
Or you stay quiet, and maybe, just maybe, you contribute to this whole environment where the spectacle kind of drowns out the real thing. Authenticity gets lost.
Remember those creators? The ones whose whole brand was built on their struggle, and then later questions started popping up about how real it all was.
Oh, yeah. The fallout can be intense. People feel so invested, betrayed even,
Right.
when those cracks appear. It really shows how much we want to believe those stories of overcoming hardship.
Totally.
And from a psychological angle, it's fascinating, right? These stories tap into our own deep needs for meaning, for connection. Sharing pain can be healing, definitely. But when you do it publicly, it can also become, well, currency, social capital.
A way to build an audience.
Exactly. Cultivate influence. You really have to ask yourself, honestly. When you share your struggles online, what's the main driver? What are you really looking for?
It's like that old line, power corrupts.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe today, the relentless chase for sympathy can also twist things.
Mm-hmm.
Could that desire for online validation, for shared suffering, actually start incentivizing people to, well, exaggerate, maybe even make things up?
It's interesting to think about historically, too. I mean, throughout history, claims of being victimized have carried enormous weight, sometimes life or death consequences.
True.
Now, you take that power and you amplify it with the speed and reach of the internet. These claims can explode, they impact reputations, movements, everything. And it's not always malicious people doing it on purpose. The way these platforms work can naturally favor those really charged, emotional victim stories.
Just take a second. Think about whose stories might be getting drowned out. The people dealing with genuine, quiet struggles, the ones not packaged for clicks. Whose platforms have you personally boosted? Whose voices have you shared, maybe just based on how painful their story sounded? What really pulled you in?
And here's a slightly uncomfortable thought, maybe. How much of the empathy we show online is really about genuine connection versus how much is maybe a subtle kind of performance itself? Virtue signaling.
Like showing everyone how compassionate we are with a quick retweet?
Yeah, are we sometimes more invested in demonstrating our empathy than actually digging into the complexities of someone else's situation?
Okay, here's a stark choice for you. Would you rather go through something genuinely tough, but do it silently, maybe even unnoticed? Or present a really compelling story of struggle, maybe jazz it up a little and get showered with praise and support?
Oof. what does even thinking about that choice say about our culture right now, about what we value?
And when you see an online pile-on, a cancellation, what's your gut reaction? Is it to immediately jump on board with the accuser? To just accept the victim's story at face value?
Or do you try to pause? Try to keep a critical eye, look for other angles, potential biases, even when everyone's emotions are running super high.
Let's do some quick, maybe uncomfortable questions. Would you ever say, make a minor annoyance sound bigger than it was to get sympathy, or maybe even an advantage at work?
Have you ever been tempted, even for a second, to bring up an old hurt in an online fight to score points?
Would you share some juicy, maybe unproven accusation against a public figure if you knew it would get a ton of attention?
It's really vital, obviously, to listen to marginalized voices, to understand systemic issues, but at the same time, we need discernment, right? Especially when there's serious money, like actual financial rewards, tied up in these victim narratives.
Yeah. And the incentives can really shape the story, can't they? Even subtly.
Absolutely. I heard a PR professional mention once how, in today's media world, a really well-told story about overcoming adversity is just incredibly marketable. Gold, basically.
Wow. It makes you wonder about the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For the person telling the story, and for us, the audience, just eating it up.
Which brings us to this kind of unsettling idea. Maybe sometimes fame isn't something people achieve despite their hardship. Maybe it's the direct result of how well they marketed that hardship.
And in that scenario, our attention, our clicks, our shares,
Mm-hmm.
that's the currency. We're validating certain kinds of pain, rewarding it.
It almost feels like dark satire sometimes, the explosion of trauma-informed everything, often with brand sponsorships attached, personal struggles packaged up as shareable content. Where does real vulnerability stop and clever marketing start? The line gets incredibly blurry.
Yeah, it really does.
Okay, be honest with yourself for a second. Have you ever felt just a tiny pang of maybe envy? When someone else's very public struggles got them the exact kind of attention or validation you secretly wanted?
It's a human feeling, sure. But what does it tell us about the environment we're in?
Definitely. And I remember seeing this play out within a social movement once. Someone who was initially seen, rightly, as a victim, started using that status almost like a shield to shut down any criticism, to consolidate their own power.
Wow.
It was a really stark example of how that language, the language of victimhood, can be twisted and, frankly, weaponized.
So let's flip it around. Imagine your real pain, something you're genuinely going through, being constantly ignored or minimized because someone else is out there telling a more dramatic, more sensational story, maybe one that isn't even entirely true. How'd that feel?
Awful.
Yeah.
Undermining. It would mess with your own sense of reality, wouldn't it? Your need for support.
So what's really driving us when we engage with these victim stories online? Is it always pure empathy? Or is there sometimes, maybe subconsciously, a little bit of wanting to feel good about ourselves, to feel virtuous by siding with the person who seems vulnerable?
Are we looking for genuine connection? Or are we maybe just performing compassion for our online friends?
Thinking historically again, sometimes empires or powerful groups, when they were weakening internally, they'd create these narratives about being persecuted from the outside to mask their own problems.
Interesting parallel. Could we be doing a version of that on a personal level? Constantly framing ourselves as the victim to avoid looking at our own stuff, our own internal landscape?
And here's a really critical point, I think. What if leaning into that victim identity, even if we don't realize we're doing it, isn't just about getting support? What if it's also a way to dodge responsibility?
Like a shield. A way to avoid accountability for our own choices, our own actions.
Exactly. Does it sort of become a get-out-of-jail-free card, subtly?
And building on that, could the power you get from that identity mainly just be the power to, make demands, to
Yeah.
accuse others, to push blame away instead of actually fostering real self-awareness or growth?
And with this constant flood of stories online, how often are our empathetic reactions, the ones that feel so real in the moment, actually being kind of engineered, pulled out of us by really compelling, maybe strategically crafted tales of suffering?
It leads to this really potent thought, maybe a bit disturbing. Perhaps the most addictive thing in our super-connected world isn't chemical. Maybe it's the validation we get for putting our pain on public display. That external pat on the back can be incredibly powerful.
So let's circle back to that first question. If your own deepest struggles were suddenly a product you had to sell in today's online world,
Yeah.
how would you brand them? What hashtags would you use? Which platform would give you the biggest impact?
And look, if this whole conversation is hitting a nerve, if it's making you think, or maybe even pushing back against some of your own assumptions, maybe share it. Pass it along to people in your circle, especially those who seem to engage a lot with or share these kinds of victim narratives. It could be a really useful starting point for reflection.
As you're scrolling, as you're interacting online, just ask yourself,
Yeah.
could constantly talking about personal suffering, focusing on it, sometimes be a way to avoid just sitting with the discomfort of being, without needing a big dramatic story to define who you are?
And what's actually more damaging in the long run is it the individuals who might consciously exploit their pain for gain? Or is it the whole cultural environment that rewards that behavior, the system that showers attention on those really compelling victim stories?
Think about how we consume these stories online. It's like an endless scroll, isn't it? We see hardship, maybe feel a quick flash of empathy, and then just keep scrolling. Is that real connection? Or has empathy itself become just another form of online entertainment?
Picture this. Your deepest, most private vulnerability, plastered on a giant digital billboard. And maybe it's sponsored by some corporation selling a solution. Is that progress? Raising awareness? Or is it the ultimate commodification of your inner life?
Maybe do a quick mental check. Think about the people you follow online whose main content revolves around their struggles, their victimhood. Now, really try to think critically. What are they actually offering you? And what are you giving them with your clicks, your comments, your attention?
And consider this subtle point. We often praise people for being brave when they share trauma, and that often comes from a good place, right? But could that constant praise inadvertently shut down critical thinking, make it harder to question the narrative itself?
We've definitely seen it, haven't we? Public figures who have some kind of meltdown or crisis, and paradoxically, their career actually gets a boost from it.
Yeah, it forces you to ask some really uncomfortable questions about what gets rewarded.
So what's the hidden cost to society? When the loudest claims of victimhood consistently get more airtime than quiet suffering, or the actual unglamorous work of fixing problems, whose voices get lost in that noise?
And let's challenge that automatic assumption that supporting someone presenting as a victim always means supporting the underdog. Could it sometimes just reinforce a system where the best storyteller wins, not necessarily the person who's most truthful or most in need?
Here's a subtle trap, too.
Hmm?
You don't even need bad intentions to monetize victimhood. It can just happen naturally if the system consistently rewards you for sharing that kind of story. The likes, the shares, the supportive comments, they all feed it.
So, in this whole landscape where personal struggles are becoming like online currency,
Mm.
who actually decides what someone's pain is worth? Who decides if it's valid? Is it the person experiencing it? Is it the algorithm? Is it the mob mentality online? Our own echo chambers?
I'll admit I've had to check myself sometimes. That little temptation to frame something I went through in a way that gets more sympathy online. Just recognizing that pull is, I think, a big step in understanding this whole thing.
You know, Nietzsche warned about people who deliberately stir up the waters just to make them look deep. Could some of the victim narratives we see online be a bit like that? A performance of depth designed more to attract attention than to actually foster real understanding.
There's definitely something unspoken about this whole victim economy, isn't there? Something many of us feel hesitant to really poke at, maybe even admit to ourselves. It touches on our own vulnerabilities, our own desire for connection, and definitely our fear of looking insensitive.
Yeah, have you ever held back from questioning a story online that seemed maybe a bit off, a bit exaggerated, just because you were afraid of being labeled, called judgmental, or someone who doesn't believe survivors? That fear itself tells you a lot about the power dynamics here.
Ultimately, you can't put suffering on a scale, especially online. There's no objective measure. What we have instead is this dynamic marketplace for attention. And often, the most compelling stories, the ones centered on victimhood, capture the most value. Sometimes, maybe often, at the expense of genuine authenticity.
So really examine your own motives when you engage with these stories. Is it truly empathy driving you? Or is there maybe a less conscious part of you that wants that emotional hit, that vicarious experience, or maybe even just a subtle way to feel a bit better about your own life in comparison?
Here's a tough one. If you absolutely had to choose a path of quiet healing, nobody really knows, nobody applauds, or a path of very public, celebrated suffering, which one would you honestly pick? And what does that reveal about the values we've maybe soaked up?
If we want to dismantle this potentially problematic victim economy, it has to start with some self-awareness, right? Acknowledging how we participate, even if it's just as passive consumers, clicking and scrolling.
Right.
And think long term. If a society consistently rewards and elevates public displays of victimhood, what happens to things like quiet resilience, stoicism, that inner strength you build by overcoming things without needing everyone to know? Are we accidentally devaluing those crucial traits?
Your empathy, your attention, it's powerful. It's like an investment. So be mindful. Where are you putting it? What are you actually supporting when victimhood is the main selling point of a story?
Think about your digital footprint too. Years from now, when people look back at this time, what will your engagement with these narratives say about our culture, our values?
Maybe real strength isn't about constantly showing off the wounds. Maybe it's in the quiet, often invisible work of healing them. Healing them so completely that they don't define you anymore. They don't drive your need for applause.
I'll be honest, I've felt that pull too. The subtle allure of claiming victimhood status, the perceived power it might offer. But I also see how it can be a trap, right? A kind of gilded cage that limits how you see yourself and your ability to move forward.
We're all kind of in this together, aren't we? Both the people sharing their stories and the people consuming them. We all contribute to this economy of suffering. But just recognizing that, acknowledging it, that's the essential first step towards maybe shifting things.
So, back to that core question. Are we willing to consciously shift our focus? To make an effort to champion and celebrate quiet strength, resilience, positive action, even if those stories aren't as immediately attention-grabbing or sensational?
Remember, you are more than just your struggles. You are the strength you build after them. You're what's left when that temporary applause for the performance of pain finally fades away.
If this deep dive really struck a chord, maybe listen again, but this time, try to actively notice where in your own online habits or in the content you see are struggles being used subtly or maybe not so subtly as a kind of social currency.
And if this conversation felt important, if it made you rethink things, please share it. Especially with people you know whose online presence seems heavily focused on what might feel like performative displays of pain. It might just spark a really valuable reflection for them too.
This has been the Depth Dive, hoping to get you thinking critically about the hidden currents shaping our online lives.
And today, we've really asked you to consider, in a world just overflowing with stories of suffering, are we maybe losing our ability to tell the difference between the loudest stories and the most meaningful ones?